morning, everybody, and thank you for being here. Okay, good morning everybody. So you're here in the water workshop of the conference. Thank you for being here. I will introduce myself. My name is Tsiebos. I'm a registered environmental health specialist with the County of Los Angeles, Department of Public Health. I am currently the chief of the Recruitment and Training Program. I have acquired drinking water knowledge by working with the County of Los Angeles Department of Public Health Drinking Water Program.
Excuse me, it's really hard to hear, especially with the other person talking.
I think they want to get, yeah, maybe we run out of, oh, she's coming.
Microphone?
She's coming with the microphone, sorry for that. Yeah, I saw her. Okay, let me get.
There she is. She's coming.
They're going to deliver it, so I'm going to try to speak louder. So I'm going to be the moderator today. My name is Tsiebos. I'm with the County of Los Angeles, Department of Public Health. And we have 3 panelists today. So I'm going to start with Jennifer. Jennifer Clary has served as a water policy and legislative analyst for the Clean Water Action since 2003. She directs the Central Valley Program and serves on the key stakeholder committees, advising state agencies on action to improve groundwater quality and allocate state funding for water infrastructure. Prior to joining Clean Water Action, Jennifer worked in the private sector, including a stint as a San Francisco tour guide and advocated on environmental issues in San Francisco. She holds a bachelor's degree in chemistry from UC Berkeley. Next to Jennifer, we have Norchelle Brown. So, Norchelle Brown is a Watts, Los Angeles native and first-generation college graduate. She completed a dual bachelor's program in sociology and African American studies at the University of California at Riverside. In 2013, Norchelle was accepted into the National Urban League's internship program, where she further developed her passion for advocating for communities of color while working in the Education and Youth Development Division in their New York office. In 2016, Norchelle completed a master's degree in social work with a concentration in community organizing, planning, and administration from the USC Susan Grover Tech School in social work. As a graduate student, Norchelle interned in the office of Board President Monica Garcia of the Los Angeles Board of Education, where she co-drafted a resolution passed by the board to increase services and resources to address the commercial sexual exploitation of children in Los Angeles schools. The new policy gained support from Supervisor Mark Thomas, Senator Holly Mitchell, the FBI, and local law enforcement. currently as a policy assistant in the office of Congresswoman Nanette Barragan, who represents California's 44th congressional district. Norchelle focuses on issues directly impacting the communities of Compton, Carson, Watts, and Willowbrook. Recently, Norchelle led the office effort of supporting constituents who began complaining of the community's poor water quality earlier this year. As brown water poured from faucets, Congresswoman Barragan's office responded with compassion and was able to bring national attention to the many years of poor management of the local water district and the disregard of its taxpayers. As the water district is currently in the process of being dissolved, community members are optimistic about the future. Norchelle is eager to continue a career dedicated to underserved community in Los Angeles County. And finally, we have Scott Abbott, our third speaker. We have the pleasure to work with. Scott Abbott has worked for the Environmental Health Division of the County of Los Angeles Department of Public Health for 25 years. He is currently the manager of the Environmental Protection Branch, where he is responsible for overseeing the cross-connection and water pollution control program, the drinking water program, and the land use program. He helped write the county's guideline for alternate water sources and the local area management program for regulation of septic system. He is a graduate from San Diego State University, where he earned a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Health, and from California State University of Long Beach, where he obtained his master's degree in public administration. Scott is a registered environmental health specialist with the state of California. With this being said, we will start our presentation today with Norchelle, who's going to talk about federal infrastructure. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Oh, yes. Great.
Wow.
I think they're all on there.
They're all in one presentation.
Yeah, and so Scott maybe should go first.
Okay, so.
Just scroll down to.
Or no, Scott, you can go first.
You can get all the bugs out and then we'll go after.
Exactly.
Switch off here.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning everyone. My name is Scott Abbott. I'm going to be speaking about the roles of the Department of Public Health in drinking water. So, we have 4 roles in regulating drinking water. First, we approve well construction. We inspect small water systems. We advocate for communities. And we advocate for regulatory change. And I'm going to go into each of these in a little more detail. So first off, we regulate the construction and destruction of wells. Because anytime that you're constructing a well, you're creating a pathway for contamination to get from the surface or from a contaminated aquifer down into the water that you're going to use for drinking. So it's very important that we regulate the construction and destruction of wells to make sure that those pathways are prevented. In addition, we require testing of any well that's completed for water quantity and quality. So in addition to making sure that there's clean drinking water available, we want to make sure there's enough drinking water available for whatever use the well is going to be, whether it's providing water for a community or providing water for an individual house that will be built on the property. The state has also delegated us regulatory oversight of small water systems. These are, so that's the State Water Board has regulatory authority over all water systems within the state, and they delegate to local health officers to regulate systems under 200 service connections. These are primarily small communities, mobile home parks, small businesses, churches, and restaurants that have their own wells. We also regulate all of the campgrounds in the national forest areas in LA County. And what we're doing is we go out and do inspections of these facilities, make sure that they're being operated in a safe manner. We get reports from the laboratories on all of their water quality testing and make sure that they're within the parameters. And we also follow up when we don't get reports that we were supposed to get and make sure that they do the required testing. And in doing this, we're enforcing the California Safe Drinking Water Act. So the California Safe Drinking Water Act is what California adopted, but there's the federal Clean Drinking Water Act is what the federal guideline is. And the Environmental Protection Agency establishes what the drinking water standards are for our water. There's two types of standards. There's a primary standard and a secondary standard. And these have what's called a maximum contaminant level, or an MCL for short. So primary MCLs are things that are going to make you sick, whether it's an immediate illness or a long-term illness such as cancer. So the first ones are microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, and protozoa that can be in the water and make you ill. Second is inorganic chemicals such as arsenic, which is a toxic chemical, and nitrate, which is a product from fertilizers and from human waste. And it can cause, if it's in the drinking water, it can cause blue baby syndrome, where it binds in the infant's blood in the place of oxygen, which can be fatal. And we also regulate organic chemicals such as pesticides and solvents that can get into water systems, and radionuclides, which can be present in soil. Secondary standards are the minerals and metals that can affect color, odor, and taste. So these are called aesthetic effects. These aren't going to make you sick at the levels of the maximum contaminant level for the secondary standards. But mainly it's an aesthetic effect, and I'm going to go into a little bit more about the secondary drinking water standards. Before I go into our other roles here. So we've identified several problems with the secondary standards. The first one is that compliance is based on testing at the water source. So you're testing of the water as it's coming out of the well before it goes into the distribution system to find out if there's any problem with it with color, odor, taste, or any of these metals or minerals that could cause a problem. If you exceed the secondary MCL the first time, it's not a violation. It triggers additional monitoring. You now have to monitor every quarter, and then you average the results. So in some areas, and then it's only a violation if the annual average is over the secondary MCL. You can imagine, though, if you've got color in your water, you're not going to be happy about it if your average color is bad, is within the parameters. You're going to be unhappy about your water quality throughout the rest of the year that you're not meeting the standard. The other problem with this is that the water company can come to its customers and say, to take care of this problem with color in your water system, it's going to take $50 a month from every ratepayer. And are you willing to pay for that? And if the customers respond that they're not willing to pay for it, the water company doesn't have to do anything. Even if the water is meeting the secondary MCL, there's chemicals such as manganese that is commonly found in water. And once manganese, even below the secondary MCL, once it gets into the water system, it'll then settle out and cause sediment on the inside of the pipes. And we've had problems in LA County with these sediments in the past. And one of the major problems is there's actually no regulation in the Safe Drinking Water Act that says the water quality in the distribution system needs to be monitored and regulated, or it has to be within a certain parameter. It's only measured at the source. So if something happens in the distribution system, there's really not a violation that occurs. So we've had 3 major water quality incidents in LA County within the last 3 years. The first being in Gardena in 2015. So we refer to this as the Gardena Blackwater incident. It was Golden State Water Company. They were trying to do the right thing because we were in the middle of a drought. and so they stopped flushing their pipes, which allowed more and more sediment to build up. You know, they didn't want to be perceived as wasting water in the middle of the drought by flushing their system. The sediment built up to the point where it started to cause discoloration in some customers' water, and they went in and they started trying to flush the system out. And they didn't do a very good job notifying the customers of what was going on, and customers started experiencing water backing up, you know, coming out of their faucets that was black and causing a problem. In some areas of their distribution system, the problem continued for several months. In 2016, we had the 99th Street well incident, also known as the Jordan Downs incident. This was the Department of Water and Power. The problem was that at the 99th Street well, which served the area, there was a sump next to the well where the water would sit and the manganese would settle out into the bottom of the sump. And for some reason they still can't explain, the sediment that was in the bottom of the sump got kicked up and put into the distribution system. And so people had black water in their area. This problem was compounded when LADWP tried to solve the problem, because they shut down the 99th Street well, and it was the last area in their whole distribution system that was still using chlorine to disinfect the water. And so they opened up the valves to the other areas of the distribution system and brought in water that had a different disinfectant. That changed the water chemistry, and it stripped off all of the sediment that was built up on the pipes and caused an additional problem and a longer ongoing problem. They were very proactive about trying to take care of the problem, but even when a water company is trying to take care of it, they only have so much water. They have to shut down areas in order to do flushing, to flush the bad water out of their system. And they divided the area up into quadrants, and they managed to flush one quadrant a week for a month in order to get the problem resolved. It was quicker than Golden State managed to do it, but it still took quite a while for people who were experiencing discolored water. The last one you might have heard about earlier this year in April, Tsiebos Water District, which serves Willowbrook and Compton, they had not done any flushing in an extended period of time. They decided that they started to get some water quality complaints and decided to start doing flushing. They did not have the technical knowledge on how to design a flushing program for their system. Did not have adequate water for their system, or adequate water pressure, or even adequate fire hydrants to be able to blow the water out of the system that was contaminated. And they basically stripped off all of the sediment that was inside of their pipes and just sent it circulating throughout the entire distribution system. This started in April 13th. It was a Friday. And it went on until about August is when they started getting clean water readings throughout the entire system. And as of November 1st, in response to a state Senate bill that was passed, the county has now taken over administration of the Tsiebos Water District, and their elected board members were removed from power. So our third role, as I said, is advocating for communities. As a result of the Gardena Blackwater incident in 2015, the Department of Public Health developed a policy that is, no one should be expected to drink discolored water. One of the things that would happen every time that there was one of these incidents, the first thing the water company does is stand up in front of the public and say, the water's safe to drink. And it doesn't matter. Just because there's no bacteria in it, it's still black, brown, gritty, and disgusting, and nobody should be expected to drink this water. We've also done, in regards to all of these incidents, we try to coordinate with the State Water Board, who's the actual regulatory authority over these larger water systems. We don't have any authority to actually go in and regulate these water systems. But we work with the State Water Board to try and impress upon them that this is an emergency. If people don't have water to drink, then they're going to be drinking other things that aren't as healthy, and people need to be drinking water. There's also issues that, if you can't, if you don't have clean water in your home, then you have to go outside of your home into the community to a laundromat to wash all your laundry, because you're afraid that if I try to wash my laundry today, is everything going to get ruined? Because that black wood does not come out. So we advocate with the water utilities to try to get them to take emergency action to get these things resolved. We've issued press releases. We attended public meetings on these, and we go out and advocate for the community. In Sativa, we actually coordinated the delivery of bottled water for all of the residents of Sativa for about 4 days until we got a commitment from Sativa to obtain bottled water and give it to their customers who requested it. We also went out and inspected homes in April this year in the Sativa area to find out more information about how widespread the water quality problem was, and what the exact components of it were. And so we went out and took water samples throughout the community and identified where the worst parts were. And then once Sativa started indicating that they were having improved water quality in September, we went out again to homes to verify that water was improved, because the residents had lost trust in the system. They weren't believing the results that the Sativa was providing them. Our last role is that we advocate for regulatory change. As a result of the Gardena Blackwater incident, the Board of Supervisors directed us and the CEO's office to develop regulations that would give us the authority to regulate water companies in emergency situations like these. We put together some ideas and went to our other directors of environmental health within the state, and none of them were in favor of it. They did not want to have to get involved in this area because they frequently don't have the same type of water program that we have in LA County, and they didn't feel that they'd be able to go out and regulate any of these large water companies. We went back to the drawing board, I should say, and looked more at what the problems were, and we identified these problems with secondary standards, and that there's no regulation for the water quality in the distribution system. So even when the water board is involved, who has the regulator, there was nothing that they could do because it wasn't a violation. And so they could just try to work with the water company and encourage them to improve it. So we've developed, once we did that again, we got approval for our new recommendations. We went to the water board division of drinking water and presented them to them and said, hey, you have adopted this state law that says everybody has a human right to clean, safe drinking water, and here's how you're not living up to it, and here's how we think this can be improved. And they said, yes, we need to make these changes. And so our recommendations are to strengthen existing regulations, to create a joint policy for the investigation of these complaints, because in some cases it is the water company that's providing the bad water. In other cases it is the premise plumbing that might be contributing to the problem. And we need to, as the health department, we can cite a property owner who's renting out his property to upgrade the property and take care of a problem if it's the premise plumbing that's the problem. And we wanted the water companies to have to put together an incident response plan and submit it to the state water board anytime that there was one of these problems, so that we could see what their plan was for taking care of the problem. We wanted to increase water company transparency. How many people know who to complain to if you were to call your water company and they said, and file a complaint with them, and they said, yeah, we looked into it and there's not a problem? Do you know who you would call? No, nobody knows about the state water board. So we want the water companies to have to put on their website and tell people who call in that here's the agency that regulates us and here's how to get in touch with them to file a complaint. We want customers to have to be pre-notified when the water company is going to be doing any kind of maintenance, such as flushing, that could affect the water quality. That way they have an idea of what's going to happen. They know not to use their water. They know what to do if there is an accidental contamination of their water system. Part of the problem is when water companies go out and do these flushings, they don't want to interrupt service. But a lot of times it would be better if they said, okay, we're going to shut down the water meters for this street in order to do the flushing, so that we don't back the water up into your homes and that when you turn it on, you get the discolored water. If you forget, you can actually contaminate your water heater, and then you're going to continue to have the problem for quite a while until that water heater drains out. And we want the water companies to have to report their outcomes. So we want a company that has a problem like Gardena to put out a report that the public can read and understand that says, here's what happened, here's how we resolved it, and here's what we're going to do to prevent it in the future. So our next steps is we're going to be working with the Water Board, Division of Drinking Water, to go through the regulatory process to develop these regulations. We have our suggestions, but it actually has to go through a public vetting process, and so we've got to get through that process, and it's expected to take about 2 years. And we're going to go with the Water Board, Division of Drinking Water, to the actual regulatory body of the Water Board, and give a presentation to them next year on why this needs to be a priority and why they need to make sure funding is available for it. On a last note here, I want to talk about some chemicals of emerging concern in water systems. In the past, we've been able to detect, do laboratory analysis for down to about 1 part per million. Due to advances in laboratory analysis, we can now detect down to 1 part per trillion. So we can find out that there's chemicals in drinking water that we didn't know that were a problem before. We didn't know they were present before because they're only there at a part per trillion, but they've been identified to have health effects, and they're environmentally, they don't degrade, they're environmentally persistent, so they're going to be in our drinking water and our groundwater for a while. Most of these have been already phased out of production. They're industrial byproducts, and they've already, the industries have been advised of the problem by the EPA, and the EPA, the companies have voluntarily agreed to begin reducing these. So chromium-6 is a heavy metal, and it's toxic and can cause cancer. This is the one that Aaron Brockovich brought to everybody's attention. The federal government hasn't done a regulation on this yet. The state adopted its own regulation for chromium-6. Unfortunately, the courts overturned it because of the financial impact it would have had on small water systems, who would have mostly been put bankrupt because of the cost to treat for chromium-6. So at this point, there is no regulation on the chemical right now. 1,4-dioxane is a byproduct that is found in shampoo, cosmetics, and pharmaceuticals. It can cause liver and kidney damage and can cause cancer. And it doesn't bind in the soil, so when the wastewater comes out of the wastewater treatment plant, it's still there, it goes onto the soil, and it can go right down into groundwater and then be brought back up through the well. So the other ones are, the next group is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. These are known as PFOA and PFOS, and I'm actually going to read these from my notes here because they are kind of, it is perfluorooctanoic acid is PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonic acid is PFOS. These are environmentally persistent chemicals that can accumulate in the human body. They're used to make a wide range of substances such as food packaging, water repellents. They're used to clean surfaces before the application of Teflon to make nonstick pans, and they're used in firefighting foam. Studies have shown that PFOS and PFOA can cause reproductive and developmental effects in fetuses, liver and kidney damage, and immunological effects in lab animals. The most common findings in people that have been exposed are increased cholesterol levels with limited findings related to low birth weight, effects on the immune system, cancer, and thyroid hormone disruption. The EPA is working on developing regulations for PFOA, PFOS, 1,4-dioxane, and chromium-6. However, like chromium-6 has been around for a decade now, and we still don't have a regulation. They're trying to develop analytical methods, treatment plans, and it is currently being, there's monitoring required as a non-regulated contaminant. So if every water system in California was required to test for chromium-6, dioxane, and PFOA and PFOS, and then notify their customers if they found it. And from my conversation with the water board, no, there was no PFOA or PFOS in Los Angeles County. There's also pharmaceutical waste, whether that's from the manufacturing processes or once it's excreted by the human body. So there's a lot of chemicals that stay persistent in the water and can be brought back into drinking water into your home, and we don't know what the effects of having low dose exposures to these would be. All right, thank you very much. We will take questions in 10 minutes.
Let's see, who's next? Thank you.
Hi everybody, I am Norchelle Brown. I'm the policy assistant to Congresswoman Nanette Barragan. She represents the communities of Watts, Willowbrook, Compton, Carson, San Pedro, Wilmington, Linwood, Southgate, and a couple others. I can't remember all of them at the top of my head, but so I started in the Congresswoman's office this April. Actually, April 9th is the day that we sent out a letter to the Compton Unified School District asking to use one of their schools so that we can host a town hall in regards to sativa. And I remember talking to Scott about it quite often. We invited, actually, let me go to the next slide. So, the Sativa Water District is the first time I got to get my hands into something water related. As my bio states, I'm an MSW, so I'm more focused on community organizing, planning, and administration. So I focus a lot on human trafficking, gun violence, and issues like that. So I had nothing to do with environmental justice, but my boss is a huge advocate for environmental justice. So once we started to get calls in our office in March, actually, and we were seeing postings on Facebook of people with brown water, and it was coming out of their faucets, and our constituents were tagging us on Facebook. So my boss was like, hey, what's going on in Compton? Let's get over there and figure out what's going on. So I was the person who was representing Compton at the time, so I went out there to figure out what was happening, and here we have it. So the brown water issue was, there were brown water provided to constituents of Compton and Willowbrook, both of those communities my boss represents. It was initially a public health concern. Most of the constituents were concerned because of Flint, so they didn't want it to look like another Flint, Michigan. How many of you guys heard about this sativa water issue recently? Okay, good. I didn't want to be talking to closed ears. And then also, there was disregard, very poor disregard to ratepayers. So we would get issues in our office stating that on the website there was nowhere that they can click and find out more information about what was happening or who they can complain to. They had no direction in that. So our office stepped in to try and figure out who actually was the oversight agency. So we invited Scott with the county, we invited the State Water Resources Control Board, so many others. I can't even mention the EPA and so many others to sit down in front of the community at our very first town hall, which was hosted in May of this year, and try and figure out what the issue was and what were some possible solutions. So also there was poor fiscal and water system management for several years. It was not just a 2018 issue. And there was desperate needs for repair to the original infrastructure. I believe Sativa's been around since the 1920s or 30s, and there was no updates. And that's an issue we see around LA County quite often, is a lot of these water districts are quite old and their systems are just as old. So that's something that my boss is taking a look at now, is all the water agencies in the district and how we can try and get more funding for their infrastructure projects. And then there's also regulations. So Scott went over primary and secondary standards. There was a secondary issue in Sativa, which was the turbidity of the brown water, and there was also a smell, and then when they would wash their clothes, it would be brown, and there would be like a stain in their toilets and bathtubs. And also there was an issue that DMH stepped in for. A lot of the kids were crying when they would get into the bathtubs, and a lot of this was happening during the summertime, so they couldn't swim in their swimming pools. So we wanted to make sure DMH came in and maybe evaluated some of the kids and make sure that they were okay as well. And then also, this is a nationwide trend. This is not something that we're just seeing in LA County. As you guys are familiar with Flint, there's issues happening in Tennessee, all over the country. So it's just not a LA County issue. Oh wow, that came out pretty small. So that's a timeline of how everything happened in regards to Sativa. And if anyone would like to see it clearer, I will be more than happy to email you a copy. So I'll just go over it briefly. So in April, we started hosting town halls. That's when we got, May was our first town hall. In April and March, that's when we started to get a lot of complaints. After that, LA County and LAFCO, which is the local agency formation commission, they stepped in and said, hey, you know what, we need to do something about it. Let's focus on dissolving Sativa. So that's been something that LA County's been focused on for the past few months, and there's another meeting in February if you guys would like to attend or more information on that. I can send you that as well. And then AB 1577 was introduced by Assemblymember Gibson, which was signed recently in October by Governor Brown, which allowed the State Water Resources Control Board to step in and to find a administrator, which is now the LA County Department of Public Works. So as of November 1st, DPW is the administrator of Sativa, and Sativa is no more. They're under new management. So that was major for the community. This is the first time that this has happened in California. So as Jenny said, that hopefully this will happen again sometime soon, because we know that there's plenty of agencies who are suffering from lack of management and efficient management. So hopefully we can see that happen again somewhere else in the county. So again, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. So if anybody would like a copy of this, I will be sure to send you a copy. But these are some of the funding opportunities on the federal level. And we just got word yesterday that the city of LA was offered an opportunity to apply for the WIFIA grant, which is a great ordeal for the city. As we know, Watts, as Scott stated, is under a lot of scrutiny because of their water and the well system there. So hopefully we can get some infrastructure projects underway in the city of LA pretty soon, and hopefully the county as well. So the current administration, I know you guys want to know about infrastructure on the federal level. So the current administration proposed an infrastructure plan with an 80% local match. Anybody know about infrastructure and how that works on the federal level? Okay, so with the administration proposing an 80-20 match, what that means is, okay, we're willing to give 20% if the local agencies can come up with 80%. And as we know, in communities of color, that's nearly impossible. So hopefully now, since the election yesterday, we can get a greater plan in place, and my boss has committed to introducing a real infrastructure bill in January when things get started and things get moving. And that's it. I'll keep it short for you guys.
Thank you, Norchelle. And to conclude the presentation, we're going to have Jennifer.
Okay, let's see if we can figure out how to move this forward. Oops. There we go. Good morning, everyone. So I'm going to repeat a lot of what Scott did, but I'm going to do it from an advocate's point of view, so it'll be a lot more interesting. So just to say, I'm a bit of a ringer. I'm from Northern California, and I work at the state level on mostly water quality issues and access to water. And my organizing frame is the human right to water, which says every Californian has the right to sufficient, safe, affordable, and accessible water for human consumption and sanitary purposes. And we've been trying to parse that out for years, but I've been working on this for a decade. We passed the human right to water first in 2009, and then Governor Schwarzenegger vetoed it. We passed it again in 2012. It took us the whole 2-year session to pass it, and Governor Brown signed it. Then it took us another 4 years 3 years actually, to get the State Water Board to implement the policy, to develop an implementation plan. And we're still working to get other departments at the state level to implement policy. So what is it how do we implement it? And just kind of quickly, in California, Clean Water Action works on improving access to infrastructure funding. I know all about the Clean Water SRF and the Drinking Water SRF, and I've written a couple of bonds. And so trying to get funding, trying to get health protective standards. So you can talk about maximum contaminant levels, but that's not necessarily what you should be thinking about, and that's something we should talk about. Also, affordability is really tough in California because Proposition 218, does anybody know what that is? Proposition 218 was passed about 20 years ago, and it says that your rates for service have to reflect the cost of the service. And it didn't originally apply to water, but a couple lawsuits went against us, and now applies to water, which means that you can't subsidize, one ratepayer can't subsidize another, and it keeps most water agencies from really having robust low-income rate programs like Energy does, like at the CARES program. And then source water protection. The fact of the matter is, if all we do is treat water, we'll never catch up, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So the health impacts of LA drinking water contaminants. Something to think about is that LA water systems, by the way, there's 205 community water center systems in LA County. I don't know how many of those are the under 200, about half, 90?
Community, about 40.
Oh, only about 40? So you have, 10 million, 11 million people served by 200 water systems. It's a lot of water systems, and we should probably have fewer. So in every one of those water systems, you have the potential for a similar problem to what occurred in Sativa. You have water board members who have served for decades. They're really attached to their staff. They think they know everything about the system. They are more concerned about water rates than maintaining the system. Sometimes water rates are super low, and they should be higher so that you can actually change out a pipe when it goes bad, or if you're getting bad drinking water. So there's a lot of different reasons why you have problems in water quality problems, and a lot of it isn't necessarily about the source water, but it could be about the governance, as Norchelle said. So just some common contaminants. These are 3 contaminants that you occasionally find exceedances in LA County. Generally speaking, very good at treating regulated contaminant. The arsenic you can still find in a few communities up near Lancaster, which is not a good thing because arsenic has been regulated for a decade. And it is one of the most potent contaminants. Even it's so common people don't think about it, but it's one of the most potent contaminants that is regulated at both the state and national level. Incidence of hypertension and heart disease can be seen in as little, I'm told, as 1 in 100 people at the maximum contaminant level, but that information probably isn't going to come out of US EPA anytime soon. Total coliform is an indicator. If you have a system that's not well cared for, that doesn't have, for instance, sufficient fire flow, and you have a fire, you have a break, you can have infiltration into your system and have total coliform. Then you'd have to test again to see if you have fecal coliform. Nitrate is an acute contaminant, as is total coliform, which is one good drink of it could create immediate problems. Generally speaking, it's very occasionally found in LA County, but what I would say is LA is a very large county, and hundreds of thousands of people are on private wells. they don't have to test for nitrate. And nitrate and coliform are two of the most serious contaminants for private well owners. So, distribution system, Scott talked about secondary contaminants. We should talk about primary contaminants as well. The most common one are disinfection byproducts. Sorry, it's hard to find something cute when you're talking about water contaminants. But anyway, disinfection byproducts are a family of contaminants. So when you disinfect water, the idea is you kill germs, but they interact with everything else, and they form tons of different compounds, and some are individually regulated, but they're also regulated as a class. And the larger the system, the more carefully you have to watch for the formation of disinfection byproducts, because it has to do with the amount of particulates in your water, the length of time that it's connected to the disinfection. That's why most water systems now use chloramine, because it forms fewer byproducts. And it tends not to be a problem in well-regulated systems now. It's one of the few areas US EPA actually did halfway decent regulations on. By the way, US EPA, they don't regulate drinking contaminants. They don't do new contaminants. You're waiting for them to regulate the Erin Brockovich chemical, for which Julie Roberts won an Academy Award. When was that? 2001? Don't hold your breath. Great being an advocate. Then there's lead testing in schools. So lead is a primary contaminant, but it's not regulated for health by water systems. The way water systems regulate lead is they get volunteers. You have a certain number of homes you have to test. You test the same home year after year, because what you want to know is whether the corrosion control in your water system is sufficient to prevent lead from leaching into the drinking water. So it's not a health-based standard. It's really, it has to do with the functioning of the water system. So when you're testing for lead in schools, that 15 parts per million action level is not really relevant. And there's been no real guidance for schools. So even though we now have a state law saying that all schools have to test their fountains for lead by July 1st of next year, schools aren't told what to do about it. So generally speaking, if it exceeds 15, they'll replace the fixture. Some schools will treat as low as 1 part per million, but it's kind of a mess, and it's a real lacking area in regulation and guidance. And then in LA County, industrial contaminants. As I said, water agencies are great at treating the chemicals that are regulated, but you know what? That's not all the chemicals. So you have PCE, which is an old solvent, trichloroethylene from dry cleaners. Those have been regulated for years. You can still see detections in some water systems, but you're not exceeding the maximum contaminant level. They're doing their job there. Just this year, we started regulating for 1,2,3-trichloropropane. It was used as I think it's an industrial chemical in LA County. It was an inert chemical found in herbicides in agricultural areas. So it's just your bad luck that it wasn't used for agriculture in LA County, because the agricultural contamination we have responsible parties for, but I think in LA County you're out of luck. That can be treated with granular activated carbon, which is available. Then you have, what is it we're not treating for right now that is in our water? And so you have hexavalent chromium. Again, Julie Roberts won her Oscar in 2001. And we passed it took forever to pass the drinking water standard, and it was one of the reasons why we pushed to move the drinking water program from the State Department of Public Health to the State Water Board. Because at the Department of Public Health, it was, water isn't that big a deal. We're regulating food, we're regulating contamination, we're taking care of people. And water, everyone takes care of water, you're fine. So, but this was something they just dragged their feet on. So finally we got a drinking water standard in 2014, and you heard about the court decision. Who do you think sued the State Water Board over the drinking water standard? It was the public water systems who were worried about the cost of treatment. And remember, when you set a drinking water standard, the cost of treatment is part of what you're considering, which is why the cost of treatment the drinking water standard may not be the most health protective. So we're going to have that drinking water standard again next year, but meanwhile you have hundreds of detections in LA, they don't have to treat for it, and as far as I know, most of them aren't. I think Inland Empire is treating, they've actually found a cost-effective treatment, and so that might be something that will help us moving forward. And then he also mentioned, I'm glad you read out what PFOS and PFAS are. Okay, if it's got fluoride in it, you don't want it. And I know we have to fluoridate our drinking water. I don't think that we'll ever conquer the dentist thing about fluoride. But these chemicals, Teflon, Scotchgard, firefighting foam, they're in all of us. All the biomonitoring that's been done has found these chemicals in every single person, 100% of people. And they're not yet regulated. I know you said there were no detections in LA County. When this was on the unregulated contaminant monitoring list, the detection limit was 100 times higher than it currently is. Now the state has now created a notification level for reporting that's much lower and much closer to what the actual harmful dose is. So we're going to get some better information on PFOS and PFAS. And one difficulty with these things has to do with, I'm sure, what Martha's going to talk about at lunch, which is the replacement is another PFO and PFAS. They're just they're just shorter, they're just smaller, and they figure that's better, but it looks like that may not be the case. So what you replace something with is part of the problem. And also, why are these contaminants going out where we're trying to clean them up out of drinking water 20 years after they're banned? Come on, people, let's get some decent chemical policy. American Chemistry Council. They're not here, I'm sure. Then you have this unregulated contaminant monitoring requirement, and those are large water systems and a handful of small water systems monitor for a handful for several years, and then they pick new ones. And 1,4-dioxane, as you mentioned, is on that list. So just to say, what maybe one of the reasons why they brought in someone from out of town is because my organization is one of the sponsors of the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, and I'd like to thank PSRLA for being one of our key allies in this. And that what the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund would do is it would create a funding source so we could pay to solve problems so every California has safe drinking water once and for all. We think 1 million people in California don't have safe drinking water, but just like lead in schools, if you don't measure it, you don't know it. So we need to figure out where those problems are. We need to identify a solution, and we need to pay for it. So the whole idea is the money is one piece of it, but actually finding the problems and measuring the problems is another piece of it. So anyway, I think that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Before I open it for a Q&A with the audience, I have 2 questions that I want to address to our dear panelists. Thank you very much for a very informative presentation. So this is my first question to the panelists. We've had initiatives in the past to convince people that tap water is safe and discouraging them from buying bottled water. However, now that some areas of the county are dealing with poor water quality, how should we communicate this, and what alternative should we recommend to our communities? So, any of you?
I'll start. Scott wanted me to start. Is this on?
No.
Okay. Hello. Okay. So, as a youth growing up in the Watts-Willowbrook area, I remember I never drunk from the faucet. I always drunk bottled water. And I don't know if it's just something I've been taught over the year that you just don't drink from the faucet, or that the water quality just never been great in LA County. But I've never drunken from the water faucets. Now, as the Tsiebos is concerned, that's the only point of reference I can talk from. We definitely were advocates for them drinking bottled water, mainly because we didn't know any other resource for them to use. There were companies that called our office and was trying to sell the community filters and all this stuff, but we didn't want to bring that to the community as like a business thing. We wanted to make sure that they just had clean water. So our best bet was to let them know that we can support them in trying to get fresh bottled water. And even as far as Florida, Nestle and Niagara sent water to the community in Sativa and Compton, Willowbrook area. And as Scott mentioned, the Department of Public Health did provide water for Tsiebo for a few days, and when they left, Tsiebo, I don't know if you know this, but Tsiebo made it pretty difficult for the residents to come and pick up the water from their offices. So what the community had to do with the donations coming from Nestle and Niagara, they gave it out from their front yards to their community members, their neighbors, because Tsiebo, the water district, made it increasingly hard for the community members to come out and get water from them. And I still get complaints to this day, like, where is that water? So I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to it.
Scott is the one who said
So if you were to get a notification that there was a problem, that your water system sent out a notification that there was a detection of 1,4-dioxane or PFOS or PFAS in your water system, yes, at that point, definitely start drinking bottled water. And I don't know if any of the filtration systems that are on the market right now would be available or able to test, or not to take those out of the if you were to buy like a home filter pitcher or something like that, those aren't going to be something that would be treating that. But if you had other concerns with your water, a home filtration system would be a more sustainable system than purchasing bottled water on a daily basis.
Jennifer, do you want to add something?
So I got this on.
Okay.
So one thing that I've worked on a couple things over the years. One of the things I've worked on is certifying water treatment devices. I'm going to stand up because I can't see any of you. I'm used to being short, so I'm used to having to stand up. I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference, about 16 inches. But so certified water treatment devices, they're certified by a third party for removing a certain contaminant. But because California regulates things that aren't regulated at the national level, we have a difficult time getting that certification. And they're all for point of use devices, the filters you put on your faucet, not for whole house filters. So it's really annoying, and it's something we're trying to fix. I'll let you know how we do on that. But generally speaking, if you get reverse osmosis, a whole house, then it uses a lot of water, but it will give you high water quality that you should consider it. I would say that these emergency bottled water deliveries tend to be too little. And frankly, living off bottled water, especially if you want to use it for cooking or bathing, doesn't really work. And we did with our allies at Community Water Center in the San Joaquin Valley, we did a survey about 8 or 9 years ago with people who had nitrate contamination in their homes multi-year. We found that almost all of them used bottled water for drinking, but they still use tap water for cooking. So you really have to, it really is better if you can take care of the problem.
Thank you, Jennifer. So this is my second question, and quickly, so we can open it to the audience. When communities identify problems with water quality, how can we advocate for action before a community is faced with a water crisis?
Does that mean?
You want to start?
You should go first.
Okay.
You guys get all the complaints.
So what we did as an office is made sure that the community knew that we were allies first and not politicians. Myself being an MSW, I'm very community focused, and my boss knew that, so I was out in the community often. I would attend meetings that they were having themselves with their lawyers and things that they were doing in the community. I was there helping to pass out the water. Just from a political standpoint, just knowing that besides voting, that we have their back. We don't always want their votes. We want to be an advocate for our communities. So that was something that I was proud to do as a social worker, was to be there with the community as they were going through this, because a lot of people who came in later on, they didn't really get the community buy-in because they weren't there in the very beginning. And since our office was there in the very beginning, since it happened, we created a great group of community advocates now. When I attend meetings in the community, different roundtables on business and stuff like that, the members will come out and they'll introduce themselves as community activists now. So I'm really proud of the community of Compton because of that.
I think one of the things we need to do is as we're making the regulatory proposal, is to let people know who regulates water companies. We found out about it on April 13th, but there was problems being reported much longer before that, and the only way we found out about it was somebody called the board office and complained to the board office, who referred it to us. We didn't get any calls from the community, and so what we need to make sure is that the public knows who to contact when they have a problem, because otherwise it takes a long time for us to get aware of these things if they're not tagging our board of supervisors, or they're like they were with Barragan's office. So it's really important to make sure that people know how to file a complaint when they start having a problem in the first place. I think that's where we need to make one of the biggest improvements.
I totally agree. Communities know what their problems are, and they're the ones who'll tell you what their problem is and what they need to solve it. They may not have all the scientific knowledge, but they have the basic understanding that there's a problem. I know the sativa issue came up when I came to LA for a drinking water symposium back in February. There was a whole group of community members there saying, what are you going to do about my water quality? And the regulators there, it wasn't you, Scott, kind of blew them off a little bit, but our communications person went out and made a movie, went out and visited with them, looked at their water quality, listened to their issues, and put it out on the internet. I don't know if that helped or not, but how do you allow communities to have their voices important? And I would say that understanding who to complain to is even more important, because how many people give up on complaining because they feel like no one's listening? So how do you find the person who's going to listen, and how do you move forward with that? And I think having one thing that we advocated at the national level 20 years ago with the Safe Drinking Water Act was the Consumer Confidence Report. Have you all seen your Consumer Confidence Report? Every year your water agency has to issue a water quality report that tells you everything that's found in your water, both primary and secondary contaminants, and whether they were detected at high levels. So they'll tell you the highest level they were detected, the average level they were detected, and whether they exceeded a drinking water standard. And that's something you have to get by July 1st of every year. About 7% of the public reads them. But it's still public information. It's something you can get. But I agree that we need to have a better way to do complaints and to allow people to bring their concerns forward.
Thank you, panelists. So communication, participation is key, as you have heard it. So now I'm opening it to you for your question to our panelists. Oh, you can also ask your question in Spanish. We have translator.
My question for anybody on the panel that can answer this, what is the oversight for our LAUSD schools for water, like for the drinking fountains that our kids use? Is that tested? Who has oversight there? And if there is an issue with any of those water fountains, like what is the reporting procedures for that?
So the water system is actually LA Unified School District is responsible for regulating their own water quality. They're responsible for getting testing done. They can contact the local water system to get testing done of their water. The problem with the drinking fountains at the schools is generally, for some reason, somebody thought it was a good idea to put a big piece of lead in the bottom of a water fountain to keep it cold. And so that's the corrosion from the water pulls the lead out of it. And so the the LA Unified School District has had a program in place where their maintenance is supposed to go around at the beginning of the day and turn on the fountains and flush them so that the water that's been in contact with that lead is flushed out of the system before the kids are on campus. Whether it happens on a regular basis is something it's a self-regulating system. The Department of Public Health doesn't have any control over the school systems. The water board is working with the schools to make sure they get this testing done, but I don't know if there's an enforcement authority behind any of this.
So it's not clear. So schools never had any mandatory testing requirements. Now they do, and I'm trying to remember, was it Lorena Gonzalez-Fletcher passed that? So anyway, a bill passed requiring all schools to test their taps by July 1st of next year, and requires the water systems to do it. So the question is, if the school doesn't let the water system in, who, unfortunately the water board can only penalize the water system. So it's not clear how that's going to work. So far, only about 20% of the schools in the state have been tested. A small number, about 5%, had a positive test for lead, and about half that number exceeded the so-called action level of 15 parts per million. LA Unified, I understand, has updated their policy, so it's not just they go around and flush every morning. During the drought, they started to realize that maybe turning on every tap in the school for 1 to 5 minutes was not a good idea. So they now have a program where they're testing, as I understand, they're testing at the tap, and if it's above 15 parts per million, the action level, they replace the unit. But lead is a really funny thing because it tends to come out in particulates. So you can have no lead today and you can't have lead tomorrow. So I think it would be great if we had a more rigorous testing program, both in schools and in homes of a certain age. By the way, just so you know, since 2010, lead pipes and solder, anything in touch with water, is now lead-free. Lead-free once upon a time was defined as 8% lead. Now it's, I think, 0.6% or something like that. So new schools, new plumbing is going to conform with the standard.
Thank you. I have a question.
Thank you. I have a question about if there's any effort to reform the regulation of turbidity and color outside of just being a secondary contaminant, because the fact that, color is bestowed by chemical properties. Like, for instance, the manganese causes the black color, and manganese is not completely non-toxic. Like, there's problems from that, and same thing with particulate matter. It can sorb a lot of metalloids like arsenic and metals, and also PFAS compounds actually preferentially partition to solid phase in water, so they can be holding a lot of toxic compounds that may, especially once the person consumes it, goes into an acidic environment of the stomach, can be released from that particulate matter. So is there a way to account for the fact that those substances are not chemically inert, and it's actually what a lot of people recognize in their water first. And I think when regulators hear, oh, it's color, it's turbidity, you're fine, it's not regulated, but actually there can be a lot of problems from that.
Yeah, that's. So we are trying to get the State Water Board to adopt regulations to address the color and turbidity, so that there is some way to address it in the distribution system once that contamination happens in the distribution system. We weren't going at it as far as PFAS and PFOS though. And the manganese, there is a level that is acceptable, and it is a necessary nutrient, but at the levels at a secondary contaminant level, it's beyond that. So, but it's still, I think the state put a action level on it. It's 5 times the level of the secondary contaminant level at which a health problem would occur if you were to drink it. But at that point, it's black. So.
Thank you, Steph. You have a question, just the second one.
Okay, thank you. They're all very great presentations. I have a multi-level question. I'm interested in knowing if any of the areas that you people are involved with have anybody from the dental boards or dental associations involved with the water and the contaminants and such. We do know that the dental concerns are a part of this issue, and also in addition to that, my second part is what are people doing to evaluate their problems on a continual basis and make sure that somebody is in there testing their water and such.
I would just say that that's a great question. At one of our town halls, we noticed that the Department of Public Health, in their presentation, they announced that, there were some issues if there was a lot of manganese consumed with dental, there was a lot of dental issues. So I don't know if you want to speak to that, Scott.
There's one section of the Department of Public Health that has received funding as part of the cigarette tax for oral health, and they are coordinating with dentists on fluoridating water, but I believe that's the only involvement we have with the dentists on it.
Thank you.
So I don't have good history with dentists. They imposed mercury doing mercury separators, amalgam separators for mercury. They are adamant about fluoridation, which I question is an appropriate way of delivering dental care to the general public. And I think that what I would really love is to have some dental advocates who are really thinking in a larger, broader public health spectrum, but I don't think I've seen that.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think we have time for one last question, and that's going to be in the middle of the room.
Hi, I just moved back here from New Orleans. I'm from here, but was living in New Orleans, and we would regularly have water boil advisories. And you would opt into that by signing up for a text message, and you'd get a text message saying, boil your water, it's not safe to drink. And maybe I'm forgetting, but I don't feel like there ever was a text that then said your water is now safe to drink. And I'm sort of wondering what the process, I'm not familiar what it is in LA, if there's any sort of notification that says now is not a time to be drinking the water, now is the time. But that was because I knew to opt in. I don't know that the general population was getting those messages. I had friends that would say, by the way, I just read the Twitter feed or something, and it was really on you to be reading the news. And I don't know that phone calls were going out. I'm not sure if people didn't have cell phones, that they were getting the notifications. So just curious what it is in LA.
Okay. So water companies are required to do total coliform testing for bacteria. And if they get a positive for total coliform, then they have to test for either fecal coliform or E. coli bacteria. If they get a positive on E. coli or fecal coliform, they have to issue a boil water notice. So we get the lab result as well, and we tell the water company you have to issue the boil water notice. The water company is responsible for contacting all of their customers to let them know that this boil water notice has been issued. They have to sign off saying that they've notified every customer, whether they do that by going out and doing phone calls, going out to the and notifying the businesses and the homeowners, but they have to sign and certify to us. They've said that they've notified everybody. Where that's not protective is they will notify whoever the ratepayer is. They don't necessarily notify the resident at the rental property, the person, the tenant in the apartment complex, or they notify the school, but they don't notify all of the parents whose children are at that school. So that's part of the problem with the current system. Now, they have to get 2 clear tests for bacteria on back-to-back days, and at that point, we will sign off to release the boil water notice. At that point, they should be letting it be known, that the water is safe to drink. But yeah, that is part of the system. There's no certification that you've told everybody that it's safe to drink your water again. So we don't know how they go about notifying their customers on that aspect of it.
Okay, if that's a short one, we can take it. Yes, quickly. Okay, we have just 2 minutes before the end of the session.
This is just a short question. I think I might address it to Scott. Here in LA County, we cover 4,000 square miles, and many of the buildings that LA County and Department of Health Services has are very old. Probably the pipes haven't been changed since Methuselah. Anyway, what is LA County doing to protect their employees and those of greater Los Angeles County to test the waters and the pipes for the buildings where the employees work? and other service workers come in to help the public? Is there any testing going on so we, the employees, know if our water from our taps are safe?
There is no testing of the county buildings for the water. We rely on the water companies notifying us if there's a problem. Again, the problem that you would be testing the building system for is corrosion control as to whether it's pulling lead out of the pipes. And if the buildings have been repiped, lead wouldn't be a problem. Well, you'd still have it in the solder, so yes, there could still be a problem, but it's the water company is making sure that they're doing proper corrosion control to prevent the water from pulling the lead out of the pipe solder. So the county isn't doing anything to test its buildings for lead.
I want to thank our panelists today for very informative presentations. And I want